Cheryl. We're here to talk about the group Tacoma Against Nazis.
Who's heard of the group before? Anybody see the recent coverage or the editorial in the News Tribune?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Awesome. We'll get back to that.
So really quick, first just want to kind of tell you guys who we are. This group started toward the end of June, so we've been around for about a month and a half. Really just a group of concerned citizens who decided it was time to take some action against the growing threat of white supremacy in our community. So we're organized. You may or may not have seen our Facebook group. We've got a big closed Facebook group that's kind of where we update news and information and ask people to participate in actions. We have some subgroups and how am I doing this? Oh, I lost one of our slides with our pictures on it.
So you missed the two of our pictures. You get to see us in real life. It's better.
And Halley. And then also we have Hope Bowling and James Miller, and the four of us make up a steering committee. So we're taking input, we're liaising with the community, we're checking in with kind of neighbors around the community and people of color, and recommending actions and kind of an action plan for how we can all work together to fight white supremacy. And then we have a lot of subgroups working on kind of specific actions and different things as we go along. So why are we here?
Yeah. So we exist because we feel very strongly that in our community, any public or for that matter, private instances of white supremacy should not be tolerated. And specifically that we do not want to promote businesses in our community that have known white supremacist members. More importantly, and I'm speaking to a room, I realize, largely of people who would probably identify as white, not exclusively, but largely, that we think this is the work of white people. We had some flags that were being flown at the residence of one of the employees of a tattoo shop in Tacoma that we have had on our radar. These flags are known symbols of white supremacy, Confederate flags, all the way to things that are a little bit more of a wink at white supremacists, things like the Raven flag of Odin, some Viking symbols that have been reappropriated by folks like this, and the gamut all the way through. And it was a person of color in our community that said, hey, these flags are flying at this person's residence. What are you guys going to do about it? And Halley in particular and a number of us stood up and said, you know, this is not the work of people of color in our community. This is not the work of any sort of marginalized group who would be targeted by the action of white supremacists. We as white people need to tell our fellow white people, this is not okay. This is not what we want to stand for in our community. So really a lot of the work that we've been doing is trying to center the voices of people of color in our community, in particular the LGBTQ community, but realizing that this is, you have to have power recognizing power. And we know that we have a lot of inherent privilege being white people here in the United States. So that's a big part of who we are and why we exist.
So as Cheryl mentioned, we formed kind of specifically in response to some white supremacist flags that were being flown on the east side of Tacoma. As you can see by our name, Tacoma Against Nazis, that's kind of a shocking name. I think a lot of people hear the word Nazi and they assume that we're talking about people whose political beliefs we don't agree with, or that it's hyperbole. What we're talking about are actual neo-Nazi groups that are present in Tacoma. They've always been here. It's a problem across the country, but as we saw last year with Charlottesville, as we've seen with recent clashes down in Portland, Oregon, and as we know with the upcoming anniversary Unite the Right March that's coming up in Washington, D.C., that these groups are becoming emboldened. These guys are finding each other. They're kind of linking arms, and they call each other Roman saluters, so referring to the Nazi salute. They appropriated it from Roman soldiers and around the 30s, and we're talking about actual Nazis here. This isn't hyperbole.
Yeah.
So our group formed specifically to respond to these flags that were been flowing on the east side, right across from an elementary school. They're being flown at the residence of a co-owner of a tattoo parlor whose employees are all members of known neo-Nazi and white supremacist groups. So here's a couple photos. So again, not hyperbole. As you can see back here, this is the co-owner and sister of one of the owners. Her name is, she goes by Irma. She's a piercer at the shop. That's an 88 on her neck. So 88 is 8. We've been talking about the symbolism of 8s today, so it's appropriate. We're talking about this. 8, the 8th letter in the alphabet is H. So when people are saying 88 and tattooing 88 on their bodies, it means Heil Hitler. Actual Nazis. This is Irma and Jason. These are the two co-owners of the shop and their employee Ken. They're wearing the logo of the Northwest Hammerskins Crew 38. So according to the Anti-Defamation League, the Hammerskins are the most violent, most dangerous neo-Nazi white supremacist group in the United States. And then this, it's a little bit hard to see, but right here is an actual swastika tattooed in her ear. These are just a couple of the tattoos that we found on these guys. They've also got SS skulls tattooed on their bodies. They will do tattoos for people in the shop of neo-Nazi symbols like SS bolts. So a picture's worth 1,000 words. I realize I'm giving you a photo and 1,000 words, but all that is to say we're talking about actual neo-Nazis in our community. So hence the inception of our group, the name Tacoma Against Nazis. We're here because we want to make it clear that Tacoma is not going to stand for this. We are not okay with white supremacist flags being flown across from an elementary school or anywhere, and we want to make it too uncomfortable to do business in Tacoma if your business is tattooing hate symbols on people's bodies. So that's what we're here to do. They've also got another tattoo that they really like is the 14. It's called the 14 word. The 14 words stand for something like we must preserve the future for our white children. So she's got 14 on her body. She's got 88 on her body. Actual Nazis. So our goal is to shut these guys down. I personally don't believe that they should feel comfortable doing business in our community. Then we're going to find the next. These are the most obvious. This is our kind of easy entry point. It's easy for people to say, yes, I am also against Nazis. Yes, I am also against people with swastikas on their bodies. But there are more, and we're finding through our work that we're kind of drawing them out. A couple of the other groups, we mentioned the Hammerskins. A couple other groups that are really active around town is there's a group called Patriot Front. You may have seen news or you may have seen flyers going up around town that are anti-immigration and encouraging people to report their neighbors. Those are the work of a group called Patriot Front. Their local organizer is based in Gig Harbor. They're also classified as a white supremacist hate group by the Southern Poverty Law Center and Anti-Defamation League. There's also Patriot Prayer, which is kind of Patriot Front Light. They say they're a patriotic group trying to kind of get back to our roots of Americana and patriotism, but they invite all these other groups to their rallies. They work with them. They're kind of a gateway group into the more dangerous white supremacist groups. And then we also have a local chapter of Proud Boys. So again, another really violent white supremacist group. They're the ones you probably remember marching with the tiki torches from last year. They wear black polo shirts buttoned up to the neck with yellow trim. And they're all here, kind of hiding in plain sight in our community. So we're here to draw them out.
And if you voted yesterday in our primary, you may be aware that there is a man named Joey Gibson who's on the ballot within our state, and he is a known member of Patriot Prayer. He is an out member of that organization who's running for public office down in Front County. So
that's kind of one of their strategies too, is to try and normalize these groups. So Gibson's leader, Patriot Prayer, they kind of wrap themselves in the flag and say we're just good patriots, but they're working with hate groups whose missions explicitly call for the eradication of people who are not white.
So our first organizing meeting was on Father's Day, and since then we have had over 900 people and more folks every day that are joining the Tacoma Against Nazis Facebook group, either because they've heard about us in the local news and feel like they want to know more or take part in our activities. But we've galvanized at this point nearly 1,000 folks that are just interested in the work that we're doing. Our first action was an in-person protest at Tacktown Tattoo, which is down at South 72nd in McKinley. And hatred and promoting those symbols of hatred within the community in their work or personal lives. And along with that, we encourage members of our group to let their opinions be known on social media. For example, things like Google reviews, Yelp reviews, Facebook reviews, to indicate to potential customers of the shop that, hey, be aware of who's going to be doing this work for you if you go there to get a tattoo. We've also engaged in a couple of letter writing campaigns. So one has been to the landlord of the shop. He lives up in Sammamish, and we've appealed to him to say, you have options of who you rent to in our community. We'd love for there to be a strong presence of a business that is going to support and promote the really diverse community that we have on the east side and the south end of Tacoma. So please consider renting to some other neighbors who want to take up their business there. We've also done a letter writing campaign to some folks affiliated with JBLM. We are aware that the military keeps a list of organizations that it specifically does not want our service members to patronize, and so we've been trying to make sure that this is basically on their no-go list in terms of where our service members might be choosing to get tattoos and piercings. More likely tattoos than piercings, right? Consulting collaboration with local residents and leaders, particularly of color. It's been really important to us that we are having voices, not just from the folks around our table. I think that what our group observed with the editorial that was in the News Tribune this past week is that when you have a limited number of people or a group that's maybe not diverse that is sharing information or ideas, that you might miss part of the story. We don't want to miss part of the story, so we've been trying to talk with folks in the neighborhood, particularly folks from either marginalized groups or in particular people of color in the community, to say, how did the actions that we're taking and the things that we're thinking about square with what you know is best for your community? And that's been really important to us. Has anybody seen our billboard that we put up down on Pacific? Yeah. So it's an intentionally provocative piece. Just says very simply, there are Nazis in our neighborhood, and directs people to potentially, Google our name by virtue of Tacoma Against Nazis being at the bottom of that billboard. And so we have been engaging in a coalition with other groups. There's a lot of folks who have been researching the actions of white supremacists long before our community-based group did. And so we've been partnering with those folks to get information and share information. And largely that happens electronically. Most of the actions that we have, we're either organizing through social media or other channels that are electronic in nature. Did anybody see posters that were downtown, or see coverage of these posters that were downtown, specifically trying to get people to call ICE if they saw folks that they might think are quote-unquote illegal immigrants, undocumented people in our community? These were plastered up right after some of the strong action started happening down at the Northwest Detention Center with a group that's been occupying down there. So we were part of a group that was deflyering those illegally posted posters.
They come down really easy with warm water and soap and a sponge, if you guys see any offensive posters.
And so along those lines, we're trying to support other groups in the community just by raising awareness of some things like everything from the Tacoma Pride Festival to the group that's been down at the Northwest Detention Center trying to raise awareness of these issues, because we see that there's a lot of intersection with where white supremacy is negatively impacting or potentially negatively impacting members of our community. So we've been busy since June. This is not how we intended to plan spend our summers, but it's important work. One of our organizers has been over in Cambodia and Thailand for most of the summer, and we'll get messages from her late at night and early in the morning, and we send stuff back to her, and it's it's been an interesting summer.
I just said on this slide too, you're all business people, so you understand this is a list of tactics. Like a billboard that's up for a month in South Tacoma is not our strategy to take on white supremacists. Taking flyers off of poles around town is not our strategy. Our strategy is hit them from all sides until it is so uncomfortable to do business here that they can no longer be in operation tattooing SS bolts on people's heads. We also, safety is a big concern in this work. There are for this week because I'm not a white supremacist hanging out in creepy internet forums. But there are people who are trying to actively dox and harass anyone engaged in this work. So there's a forum on something called 8chan where people are trying to find my address so they can come mess with me at my house. We already have documented attempts by known neo-Nazis in our community of trying to get into our group, of trying to contact our members. So that's the reason for the closed Facebook group, and that's why a lot of people who aren't involved in the actual organization and the action planning are not seeing the full picture because we don't think it is strategic nor secure to post our 6-month takedown plan of this business into a Facebook group. So we'll kind of pepper these things out. We don't post anything until it's ready to be activated. So that's why you've probably seen kind of bits and pieces of what we've been doing. But we're never going to put it all in one place until it's done, basically.
And even though we know that there is a personal risk or physical risk potentially associated with doing this work, we really believe that that is something that, particularly as white people, we don't have to take on necessarily in our day-to-day lives as we walk down the street. So it's a really good empathy exercise in particular in being able to identify with folks who might be targeted by white supremacist group. But really and truly, we do believe that sunlight is the best disinfectant. We don't think that white supremacists are going away unless we call them out on what they're doing. And that is not the opinion of every member of our community. Some folks feel like we're highlighting this and we're bringing it to the surface, and we're therefore creating more of it. But we really think that you have to call it out. You have to call it by its name in order to see things move forward.
It's also important to us to be publicly standing up against this. So you see us standing before you, you can see we're not Antifa, we're not black bloc guys with masks over our faces fighting people with stink bombs in downtown Portland. We see ourselves as a coalition building kind of from the mainstream middle of knowing that there are groups like that who, many of whom hide their faces because they're like into deep counter surveillance against these groups. Many of them hide their faces for other reasons. But we're here kind of to represent the middle and stand up and say, it's not just extreme versus extreme. The majority of the country is not in support of neo-Nazis, and so we're kind of stepping into the sunlight ourselves with our names, our faces, our reputations. I had to have a conversation with my boss at work saying, hey, if you start getting hit up by neo-Nazis telling them to fire me, here's why. And we had to have a conversation about how this work could hopefully not impact my livelihood. But I have a great boss. He said I could just post his email in the forums and tell them where to go. So a couple things that we have coming up next. Again, this is not kind of the full picture, but we're working on a lot behind the scenes. So in the fall, we're going to be kicking off an educational series. The other thing that's really become clear is I had not personally heard of the Hammerskins until this summer, until this issue became kind of came to light. And so some educational work around helping people recognize hate symbols in the community. My little brother was born in the year 1988, so his email has 88 in the email address. Now when I see 88, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, is that person into Hitler? So just kind of becoming more aware of the signs and symbols that we see in our community and being able to recognize them, and then also being able to put them into context. So, not calling the police and saying, I think my brother is a neo-Nazi because he has 88 in his email address.
Or a Dale Earnhardt Jr. fan, I think his number was 88 or something like that.
Yeah, totally. Or there are many religions that use the swastika shape in a peaceful sense too. So our work is specifically focused on known and documented neo-Nazis. We have a rule in our group that we delete any posts that come to Facebook that are kind of rumor mongering or I heard this business is sympathetic to neo-Nazis. We don't accept anything unless it's documented, unless we have photos of the people in the business with swastikas on their bodies or other
other actions, yeah.
So fall educational series, we're working on an outreach campaign for local restaurants and businesses. These groups need places to meet, to get together and kind of egg each other on, and so kind of educating local restaurants. So if you see a group of guys in Fred Perry polos, they're probably Proud Boys. Here's what you should know. We're also hoping to start a series of open letters signed by local organizations. So if this is something your group would be interested in, I'd love to follow up with Jason. But we're trying to put pressure on the landlord. I actually found his cell phone. I called him. I had a conversation with him a few weeks ago. He said he's aware of all of our concerns. He's been receiving all of our emails. He knows that he partnering with other groups that are doing things like the peaceful rally last Friday in response to a Joey Gibson protest, things like that. So lots of outreach that will be coming up.
So you might be thinking, what am I going to do with this? How am I going to synthesize this? I'm just learning about this. Maybe I want to take action. Maybe I don't know how to do that. First of all, we will certainly encourage you to join us in our letter writing campaign. We know that hearing from other business owners is something that would be really powerful. In particular, if you have an option for Jim, the landlord, Jim Goose, who he might just be really looking for, how do I supplant this rent with rent from an upstanding business? So if you have ideas for that, certainly very valuable. But putting your own name and affiliation is something that you would maybe want to take a personal action on. Being aware of local hate groups, and we'll put our website up in a minute. It's an important thing to know who's in our community that we might not want to have in our community, and certainly having these conversations. Many of my conversations that I've had this summer have been with folks in our community who are just like, I thought this Nazi stuff was over. I thought this was done. And recognizing that with our current political and social climate, there is a sense of people feeling more at liberty to step out into light with hateful views. And if we don't have conversations with members of our community, members of our family, that is unlikely to stop. And so along those lines, when you see something, say something. If you are to see some sort of flyer downtown or elsewhere in our community that you think, I think this is targeting a group that shouldn't be targeted, or I think that this is promoting hate or racism or oppression, please be an upstander and take an opportunity to be spreading the messages that we want to have in our community, our support for one another and our belief in one another, rather than our belief that some people don't belong here. We really feel strongly that we're all part of that conversation.
So that's really the end of our presentation. This is our website, disconnectwhitepower.com. We'll follow up with Jason with a bunch of kind of links and materials, and the Anti-Defamation League is a great database of hate symbols.